called Zoom bombing. So Zoom bombing is whenever somebody takes over the screen and the audio that's not necessarily a meeting participant. If that happens, what we'll do is we'll shut down the meeting, and then we'll actually follow up with an email so that we can resume as soon as possible, perhaps at a later date. So today's agenda, right now we're going through the introductions and meeting logistics. We'll then shift into what is really the purpose of this meeting, as well as an overview of what is the difference between values, vision, mission, and goals. We'll then go into breakout groups, which is going to be the majority of our time today, because we really want to focus in on hearing from y'all what are the values, vision, and goals that you have for this specific region. And then we'll talk next steps and we'll close out. If you haven't already, please let us know who you are in that chat box. So the purpose for today's meeting. Well, we got to start kind of big picture here, and this is very big picture. So you can find more information about the Louisiana Watershed Initiative online at watershed.la.gov. And that program is actually a statewide effort to address flooding through efforts at the state as well as regional level. We are anticipating a $1.2 billion investment from HUD that is specifically tied back to the flooding events of 2016, both March and August, that will go to the Office of Community Development at the state level. Some items that they're going to be focusing on across the state for this work is the development of watershed coalitions, which is the same thing as the Regional Steering Committee, what the Regional Steering Committee is at this point in time and will transition to over time as a coalition, increasing capacity across the region to do floodplain management, developing flood models, and identifying and funding projects and programs in each region. For today, shifting into today's conversation from that larger picture, we're going to be really talking about the value, vision, and goals, and these are going to be ideas for guiding principles for the long-term strategy and development of the Region 7 Regional Steering Committee and the work that will be done in Region 7. This is a community of regions that hasn't existed before, and so we know that, this is a big region where everything east of the Mississippi, west of the Spillway, and then north of the lakes. And so from that perspective, we know that there are a lot of things that we have in common, and there are things that are different about us too. So by having this conversation, we can talk really openly about kind of getting to who we are as a region, what we value, and then where we want to go as a starting point for defining the work within this region. So values, vision, mission, and goals. We wanted to kind of set forward some definitions for tonight and what we mean when we say each of those things before we go into the breakout groups this evening. So values, these are who we are. These are the essence of the region, of any effort, of a program, of anything. They should support the vision, and they should also ground us when making decisions. There are some examples that you'll see below, so you can see that it ranges from everything from one word all the way to a sentence. And it doesn't have to be any of these that come up tonight, but these are just some examples to help people kind of get their thinking going. In terms of vision, this is what we want to become. So think about this region, which is basically this large swath east of the Mississippi, west of the Bonnie Creek Spillway, and then north of the lakes. Where do we want this region to be in the next 10, 20, and 25 years? And then how are we telling people within the world where we want to be in the future? How are we communicating that to people? This should be also supported by our mission and goals. And then once again, you'll see a couple of examples on this slide below. Everything from what is quite a long sentence by LSU's Office of Multicultural Affairs. It says a lot about where they want to be in the future, all the way down to just a couple of words. So once again, there's a range of options. So don't feel like you have to be set in creating an entire vision statement today. The mission, we actually already have this, which is great. So Office of Community Development, along with their other state partners, worked on developing this mission. And the mission tells the world what we're working on right now. So the goals should support it. And our current mission right now for the Louisiana Watershed Initiative across the state is to reduce flood risk, improve floodplain management throughout the state, and maximize the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains. So our goals, they should support that mission. And these goals are going to specifically tell people what we want to accomplish as we're thinking about that mission. And we actually have some of these. So if you go to watershed.la.gov, you'll actually find the action plan that OCD submitted to HUD for how they want to spend the $1.2 billion across the state. So some of those goals that we already have are to increase capacity of parish staff, and that's specifically around floodplain management work, interagency coordination and collaboration, and so on. It's also to increase community rating system scores, increase participation in watershed activities, and more. Some other examples that are just examples pulled from other organizations or other efforts are to strengthen partnerships with community-based organizations and to address water quality through projects and programs as well. So just a quick recap of those. Today we're going to be talking through and hearing from y'all what you think the values, vision, and goals for Region 7 of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative should be. And so once again, revisiting the Louisiana Watershed Initiative is an effort that is taking place across the entire state. So there are 8 regions total where we are all coming together to really think about how are we reducing flood risk across not just our region, but across the state. And so these efforts are all going to kind of be building blocks on top of one another for that. So the meeting process for tonight, and thank you to everybody who joined while we have been getting started here. I promise you didn't miss too much. And we certainly have time in the breakout sessions to help guide people through this as well as answer any questions. So what we're going to do is have 3 25-minute breakout sessions followed by a 10-minute report out. And it's not a 10-minute report out per breakout group, it's 10 minutes total. So if we have 5 breakout groups, then that means that each breakout group will get about 2 minutes to talk about what they talked about during their breakout group session. We'll have a maximum of 10 people per breakout group with a facilitator to guide the conversation and to take notes. You'll stay in that same breakout group for the entire meeting, and then each group's going to have questions that are going to prompt the dialogue. So we're about to break out into our breakout groups, and I do want to offer a quick disclaimer. This is the first time that I am doing this, so bear with me just in case there are a couple of technical difficulties. I do promise that we're going to do our best to work some magic on our end to make this happen and to make it as seamless as possible. So if something seems awry, we will get it fixed, I promise.
Match money directly from federal funds. We are in a bind, there's some big ticket projects in Ascension and other parishes in EBR. All of that is going to be in jeopardy, and all the planning we do is all based on the assumption that funding will be right in tow. But now that seems we need to focus more on the scenario planning aspect of it. So we just issued an RFP for a long-range transportation plan and made sure pandemic scenario planning is included so that we are resilient and not caught off guard. My 2 cents. That was long.
I'm finding, from a personal professional level, how important personal face-to-face interaction is with people, as opposed to doing Zoom meetings, as opposed to doing conference calls, how important it is to kind of sit around, and brainstorm, on certain problems, in a room with a whiteboard or whatever the case is, and just get the business conducted that way. Not that Zoom is not beneficial, it certainly is. We're doing it now, but looking at that from that perspective has been really important for me. And maybe I'm old school on that, but that's
a great point. We miss that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. I'm just adding a comment, y'all, from Ben. He wasn't able to access audio, so he's typing comments into the chat. Some of y'all may have seen that. He mentioned green infrastructure and parks because we're outside more, just making sure we included that, but y'all go right ahead.
Hey, Jerome, I definitely agree with you. I feel like Zoom is not the medium for times where you have to look at a map together and kind of explain in 3 dimensions. Explain your point or to get a point across. I think Zoom's very two-dimensional, so you can't really reach through and point to something that you mean or someone that you're interacting with. Like, I work for the government, so a member of the public pointing to something because they don't understand. There's a lot of like data, a lot of information lost through through this kind of interaction, through this medium. And it's very, I think it is very important to, or I'm realizing how important it was to have that.
That's a great point. I'm going to bring the second question into the mix, but don't stop with your answers to the first question. If you want to revisit some of those points, we don't have to cut it off, but I'm also bringing into the mix a more positive question. Why do you love where you live, right? We all live places for a reason, whether it's family or amenities.
So one thing I would say about that kind of goes into number one, is that I think that a lot of industries and a lot of cultural events were very dependent on personal interaction and close interaction, kind of like what Soares was talking about with transportation, like taking Ubers and stuff, but also going to festivals. All the festivals have been shut down in New Orleans. St. John's festivals have been shut down. And a lot of people really missed that. And that was a way that we, kind of got together and built identity together. And now that's gone, and life feels a little more empty. But I do like that about where I live, is that usually we can like get together and do that. And it, people are still trying to do that, I guess, through a different medium now, and it's taking a little get to used to, but I do like that spirit of trying to get together and celebrate.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Devin. I live in the city of New Orleans, but drive to work every day, and the cultural events, the closing of restaurants, all the entertainment and everything else that occurs in the city, as well as here in the parish, Ascension, is pretty devastating, as well as economically and socially, So.
I'm going to respond to the second question. As a planner, I always differentiate between transportation cost and your housing cost. And I would rather stay closer to my workplace and save on traffic time to spend with family or focus on work. And it's just so happened that my workplace is within 5 miles from my home. So is the place where we visit more, Temple, Costco, all our doctors, pediatrician, gyno, OBGYN, all of that is very close by. And I feel myself lucky not to be riding on interstates or minor arterials and above. I'd rather be on Jones Creek and Tiger Bend and South Harold in Millerville. I don't want to go outside. So, and all the facilities are close by. The proximity is one important thing. I almost got one in Ascension Parish in Dutchtown, but then I realized Jerome is going to tax me more, so decided.
Well, you'd be causing more traffic here, and that's a no-no for a lot of people.
That's true. Especially with the Belle Savane, you're trying to get the new roadway connector off of Bluff Road.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
That's a good project.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to jump in? I'm wondering how some people feel about, the coronavirus has made a lot of us go outside, I think, more than we normally would, even though we all love the outdoors. Do we appreciate the fact that we live somewhere where it's not snowing half of the year? I mean, I know that's been nice for me trying to get the kids to run around and that kind of thing. You couldn't do that everywhere, right?
I think so for sure. I mean, it's hard right now since it's August and sweltering, but
Yeah.
I do think you have a point there because it's going to get cold soon in a lot of places, and that's not going to be fun.
I see Mr. John on the line. Did you want to join in, John? I'm not sure. Let us know if you can't hear us or if you're having issues. I'm going to take us along to question 3. What do you feel is missing from your community? This is a really interesting one.
Evelyn, can you be a little more specific about what, what you feel here? Because, we're talking about flood control, flooding issues and things of this sort, floodplain management, watershed, is it related to that topic or, just in general?
It could be, but it doesn't have to be. Because we're talking about values, it can be things like, I wish that my community had more festivals, or like, I wish I knew my neighbors more, or I had a farmer's market. It doesn't have to be strictly water management related.
Okay.
But it can be. Don't be shy. If the thing you think is missing is you want less water in your community, that's absolutely relevant.
Hey, Evelyn, this is Tanya. I will weigh in here. And, part of the reason that I live on the West Bank in New Orleans is I have that wonderful levee to run and be out on. But now everybody's out there, and there's no way you can social distance up on that thing, right? We all want to get on there. So I've been doing street running early in the morning. And of course, then you're fighting traffic, and there are no designated pedestrian lanes, right? And I would really like to see how we use some of our medians. Like St. Charles Avenue does really well. They've got the streetcar tracks and enough space that you can run in the a safe zone. And there are a lot of neighborhoods that have wide alleys and medians that could be topped. With BRIC coming on, Evelyn, I mean, why aren't we doing some stormwater management and some non-pervious type things in all of the medians and of our streets, so people have options for when we're outside? And we don't do that well in New Orleans. We don't do that well really across the state. We may have one designated place, but then everybody is there. I see, let's put together a huge old BRIC package, seriously.
That's a great point. Like, everybody's outside now. I find myself doing the same thing, trying to find, okay, what's the park that's going to be the least crowded? It's like such a weird problem to have.
Uh-huh.
I'm hearing from Ben. I'm trying to paraphrase this. So message me in the chat again, Ben, if I'm saying this wrong. I thought one good piece of input he had on why do you love where you live is he mentioned that Ascension Parish has a lot of factors kind of collaborating to deal with their flooding issues. He said a parish that provides examples of how population growth can impact flooding traffic and what solutions government, private, and non-governmental agencies can do to address these problems. It's a great learning experience for those working in the field or getting into the field. That's a great point. Thank you, Ben. We have a little over 5 minutes left, so y'all go ahead and jump in.
yeah, being in Ascension Parish and the planning director for Ascension, I'd like to talk to Ben a little bit more about what he means by that. But we are trying to look at possibilities of combining recreation areas with flood control areas and try to integrate those two. That's something that's been done around the country, things of this sort. So I think that that's something we would like to pursue. Obviously, there's some issues about acquiring property to be able to do that in quantity, as well as being able to accommodate the hydraulic needs, for those large areas. So that's something we're certainly looking at. And I think everybody in South Louisiana is probably look at that, not just us.
I see a lack of pedestrian infrastructure in EBR, and not entirely, but in the area where I live, it seems that it's skewed towards auto-oriented movement of transportation. There is CATS, but its connectivity is basically for a specific focus group. And I think times are changing and people are open to alternative modes of transportation. And I think member jurisdictions would be prudent enough to embrace that. And that would help in sustaining, I don't want our kids to move out of the state when they have options like California, West Virginia, other places. I think it starts right there with us to make sure we get the pulse of the future generations and start being more resilient.
I'd like to piggyback off of that. So I work in St. John, and there's definitely a lack of pedestrian infrastructure. One of the reasons I think is that a lot of the main economic center is built around a state highway, Highway 61, and putting, sidewalks or bike lanes on that. I think people are very cautious of that because they're very scared of like the traffic that could go there. So I think like one thing would be like a lack of entertainment centers or like commercial centers off of like state highways. So maybe at least in St. John, or maybe just like a lack of traffic calming devices. And then I guess a lack of communication between like DOTD districts and like local governments to see how you can work out those kinks when it comes to permitting or like trying to design something and then hitting a roadblock because you didn't realize that you needed a corridor study or something like that.
I'm seeing some more comments. Thank you guys so much, by the way. I'm typing as fast as I can to keep up. These are great comments. Ben made a comment in the chat, public education pertaining to flood risk locally. That's something that is missing. That's a great point. And then I also see, he made a comment, he said, Move BR is a program trying to address some of those concerns. I think that Saraz brought up. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to add those to the document here, but y'all keep them coming. We have about a minute and a half. You know what? While I'm saying we have about a minute, I'm happy to report out on these when we get back to the group. But if someone here wants to do that instead, y'all let me know and we'll throw the mic to you. You got to do it in like 2 minutes.
And also, I think, I've lived across the world, and there is a lack of cohesion amongst our community in terms of, small festivals, maybe a neighborhood park or a mud strut area, farmers market, switching places so that, people get a sense of community. And I think that's missing. People seem to be way too involved in themselves rather than their neighbors. And, I don't know. I just moved from Alexandria, so there was neighborhood watch groups, which have pages on Facebook. You get a lot more information about handyman and all of those. I don't see that uh, here yet. I mean, it's been just a month, so maybe it's my lack of knowledge.
I think that's a great point. Okay, we're about to be pulled out, y'all, so just bear with the technology as we do that.
Thanks y'all for hanging in there for the technical issues that we had. I'm glad that I prefaced that by saying that was the first time we had ever done it. And thank y'all for being very adaptive and willing to be on this journey with us. So we're gonna do the report out really quickly, and I think we'll give about 1.5 minutes to each group. So let's see, let's go ahead and start with Tom, if that's okay.
Well, thank you. I was with Mr. Ken Wheat from Public Works in Washington Parish, with Ms. Ivy Matthew from the St. John the Baptist Coastal Advisory Council, with Mr. Matthew Allen of the Tchefuncte River Association and the Florida Parishes River Watch. We learned very interesting things about how COVID has maybe highlighted more health disparities than people were thinking about beforehand, how it's highlighted maybe some data gaps in parish government. And we heard from Mr. Allen about how everybody's been home and just pestering the municipal governments for more and more things, of which I'm definitely one of them. I think all of the participants in our group are natives to the region, have deep roots here in Southern Louisiana. There's a connection to recreation, to fishing, to having grown up, that the rivers and these waters are in their genes and in their marrow. In terms of some of the what people think is needs, that there's a range of questions from looking for grants to clean out scenic rivers, to improve floodplain management, to better educate the community, and to better understand the connection with nature in terms of some of the flooding issues. And it seems like everybody in my group is very engaged in their community, both in terms of going out of their way to enjoy the river, educate people about the river, to volunteer, and to also contribute to public service.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Y'all had a really robust discussion. That's impressive. Let's go to, let me see, Brad, if you're ready. Let's go to Brad next.
Sure. So, it's a lot of similar conversation, it seems like. One of the coolest things I think that popped up was this need for, this is coming from Karen, this need for outdoor spaces that could be adaptable to outdoor environments that are adaptable to multiple types of uses. And like that, so thinking about like spaces for business, spaces for recreation, spaces for relaxing. But like not only that though, because then like the rest of our group was talking about ecosystem services as a whole. So thinking of the food that comes up from Dory, and the food that we value, and even just the silence and the solitude that we value from being in nature, and And, thinking about in Louisiana, we were lucky to have our social distance be more, we were able to be outside. In a lot of places weren't, they're too dense to have that happen. So, yeah, so in short, I think the other ones that were big were just thinking about community, like not thinking about ourselves, thinking about our community as a whole, how we can all work together, and really thinking about disaster preparedness. RJ was bringing this up. How can we, what do we really need to do today? Prioritize our needs today to plan better for the risks of tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all. I love that. What do we need to do to really think to prepare today for a risk for tomorrow? I think that's especially timely as we know that we're, basically in the heat of hurricane season right now. Let me see, Evelyn, are you ready?
Sure, we had a great group. Thank you guys so much. And I see our folks are back joining the larger group, so that's a win. We had some really good feedback specific to the coronavirus pandemic. We're realizing that we need to plan for these crazy events, that we really, I think none of us thought we would be going through this, but we really also miss our personal interactions, and not just like for work, but also, going out to a festival and like going to the farmer's market and you meet the people that you live near and you make those connections. And so we're really missing that. And, that needs to inform what we do, planning for the region, but also just, how we go about our lives. Hopefully once this, passes, we need to appreciate certain things. We also need to appreciate the outdoors, right? I think a lot of the groups probably talked about how you're spending more time outside. That makes sense. We should be doing that to stay safe, but it makes us kind of see more nature maybe than we would have. But also, our small businesses are really suffering, and we're seeing restaurants close. And I mean, this is really on a scale that I think, again, like we never thought that we would live through something so traumatic, and so I think that's really affecting us all, and it makes sense that it is. One thing that is nice about where a lot of us live in Louisiana is that we've found a way to live close to what we do for work. And that doesn't go for everybody, but, because of kind of, in some areas we have multiple modes of transportation we can use. Now, some areas that's still something we need to work on. That's the other thing we talked about. But, if you can find a way to live close to your work, that can be a benefit. But then we also talked about a lack of pedestrian infrastructure and some things that we need to work on specific to transportation, some of which is kind of highlighted by the current situation, and then just reiterating the community needs cohesion, and some of that comes from opportunities you get from like the built environment, right? And some of it is just trying to look outside of yourself, So great comments. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. These are really great conversations. It sounds like y'all. Let's go to Risa, and then we'll go to Drew, and we got just a couple of minutes here, and then I'll wrap us up for this session. Breakout group.
Great. Well, I will say that we had the best group, just so you know, and they echoed a lot of these same sentiments. So I'm going to jump to the things that we haven't covered yet. One of the things they mentioned about crises having exposed in their community is that 2016 flooding really exposed that there were areas that had not flooded in the past that were now at much higher risk. That agricultural areas in the past have transformed to residential areas, and feeling that that probably had something to do with it. Development not taking into account where water will go. But they also talked about people not caring in a lot of situations about what happens to the larger community. People are becoming a little more insular. So there was some excitement that there was a group discussion like this today. But they've also shown that we can adapt. COVID-19 especially has shown that ability to adapt, and that was promising for everyone, sustaining, if not even thriving in different situations. Other changes they talked about is that now many of the water storage bodies are pretty much out of sight and out of mind for people. And so they're not thinking through the impacts of what happens. And also that the impacts for all of these crises, no matter what type, tend to have higher impacts to areas that are low economic areas. And there's a disparity related to that, and it flows throughout all of the issues that we see. And also COVID-19 disproportionately affecting communities of color, and that on top of socially vulnerable areas can be very devastating. Though loving where we live, we all talked about, we all live in Louisiana for a reason, but some people live especially close to the water and noted that our unique culture is really based on those water resources in this state. And people who have some green space around them talk about how wonderful that is to have the space and to be able to look out and see that. But the manageability and access of the state being able to get to what you need to when you can and when you want to has been a tremendous aspect of positivity for people. But overall, in terms of what's missing, they talked about a focus on the future in terms of building children's programs, better governance structures in some areas. For instance, Prairieville doesn't have their own elected government. Connectability and walkability, making sure that every group and every activity can be tied together. And those communities that are nearby but really kind of separated from each other, finding ways to be able to bridge those gaps. That's a quick recap for me.
Wow, that was y'all, I feel like that was like an hour-long discussion. Great work, y'all. What about Drew?
Thanks, Rachel. I'm gonna try to be as quick as I can and get us moving along. So one of the things that came out was everybody recognized a deep connection to their communities as sort of an older connection to, you know, one that went back several generations. So there's value that they certainly valued taking care of their existing communities as things change and recognizing the vulnerabilities that exist across their communities. And playing off that, also recognizing the interconnectedness of all of the different communities in so many different ways across different backgrounds and across class and race. And then the third value we really pulled out was promoting equitable values and outcomes in what we do. So that's a very high level. We had a very good discussion that could have gone on longer, but I want to get y'all moving along.
I appreciate that, y'all. I know in 25 minutes seems like so long until it's not. So in my group, I had Chuck and Rob and Afe and Tom. Thank y'all so much. We talked about a lot of things that have already been talked about, and I think one thing that I wanted to add or a couple of things that I wanted to add in terms of values that this group talked about was culture. So we're a culture that lives and works and plays, and we coexist in everything that is water. It's a big part of who Louisianans are, and then a part of who we will be. Accountability was another value that came up in particular. So accountability, I think, in the context of like to each other, to the state, to doing better, and how that exists within understanding the rules of success for us as well. So being accountable to those rules of success. We also talked about diversity from a couple of different perspectives. So we talked about diversity as being a value from the aspect of people and, you know, society and our culture here. We're truly a really diverse place to live at, and it's one of the things that makes us really unique in the whole world. And we also talked about diversity in terms of sectors for work and economics as well. So it's important to be able to diversify over time, and that needs to adapt our needs. And then one other thing was collaboration across this. So, you know, we talked about in our conversation how we're working together maybe in integrated ways at the small scale, so like the parish or municipal scale, but not beyond that. And so one of the things that came up was it's really valuable for us to start having that type of collaboration. So that was a really quick 25 minutes, and now we're going to transition into about 22-ish minutes for the vision discussion. I'm going to switch y'all back into breakout groups, and hopefully it goes better than it did last time. Fingers crossed.
This breakout room. So next, we're going to think a little bit more broad. And here's the questions about Oh, let's see. Okay, so now we got a note saying, hey, RJ. Let's see. You hear me? There he is. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. All right. We're moving along. Let me put the screen, share the screen again. RJ, is there someone else in your office that you want to introduce?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. This is my esteemed computer specialist. He's called my son, and he saves my bacon whenever I have to get hooked up like this. This is Randy.
Hey.
Thank you, Randy.
He's my best.
Hey there. Very nice meeting y'all and happy to be here. Interesting,
Okay,
interesting.
great. Thank you for your technological wizardry.
Of course.
All
I
right.
second that. Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I just say I second that. Yeah.
All right, great. So it looks like we may have lost a couple people, but that's okay. We have Dory, we have Melissa, Justin's still here, and it looks like Karen had to leave and Jay left, but let's move on to the vision. We have 20 minutes. So let's get right into it. I'm gonna read, let's try something different. I'm gonna read the questions all together, and let's just see which one we want to start with first. How about that? So what is the problem we're trying to solve? What would the world look like if we solved that problem? Who collectively should be involved in solving the problems? And why is talking about water in Louisiana important? What is unique about Region 7 in this context? Okay. I think there's a good group of questions. So I guess, you know, what is our vision is really, I think, the overarching, what are we trying to do here? Like, RJ, what would be, if we could accomplish something in the next 20 years, what's that vision? And that, I mean, it's involving flood risk. Like, how do we, what's our vision to deal with flood risk in Louisiana?
Well, I think it's probably of greater paramount importance than most of us realize. We're so used to living in a world of water that we lose sight of our vulnerability until major tragedies hit, whether it be a flood or whether it be a hurricane. We can get flooded from each of these very quickly. In terms of what is the problem we're trying to solve, I think, in my simple way of thinking, is simply protecting our people and our property from floods. And it's so easy to say, but so difficult to do. But I believe that we can make a lot of progress by trying to define our problems a little differently than we have in the past, and continue to do some of the good work that is already in progress. We're doing modeling, and we're trying to understand things for the Amite Basin and across the Gulf Coast, as a matter of fact. So we just need to continue pushing in that direction and get innovative as we grow. I think there are many other things I could say about this, but I don't want to take too much time. I would take opportunity to suggest that I have worked on something that I think is going to be of impact for us, and that is protection of river flooding in the Amite. And I'm also working on trying to reduce the intensity of hurricanes, things of this sort. I didn't want to be selfishly taking position here, but that's just to indicate how important I think that is in my mind for the people that I consider my relatives and friends in Louisiana. I think a lot of people need to turn to and try to see if we can make solutions to overcome what we have seen in 2016 and the hurricanes.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So let's take it a step further, and thinking about the watershed as a region, knowing that water flows to the lowest point in the watershed, and thinking about all the different interconnected river systems, like along with the Amite, there's you know, all the different other ones, Tangipahoa, Bogachita, the Pearl, you know, and
Yeah.
on and on. The point is that these are all within Region 7. So it's like, how do we, so the problem is that any one of these river systems could flood from a storm, extreme precipitation, or from a hurricane, a storm surge, or and which could cause riverine flooding. So what do we, so knowing that, like what could we be doing better to prepare for, like what would be, I guess, okay, let me rephrase this. If we accomplished successful redevelopment to these flooding problems, what would our communities look like? Does that make sense?
Well, of course it does. It does, but I think it's not only noble, but a necessary challenge. Right
Dory.
now.
Oh,
right
sorry.
now-
Sorry,
I'm
RJ.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't want to dominate. I'll back off.
That's
Right?
okay. Let's just, I love where your mind is going, but let's give someone else a chance to
Sure.
chime in. And Dory, did you have anything you want to add about that thought? Like what would our community look like if they were totally flood proofed?
I guess if it was completely flood proof, it would kind of, because now we're kind of like the 2016 flood. I think that was a 100-year flood or whatever. And now, since that has been going on, it's kind of like every time it rains, we have these different issues. And with DOTD, I work with, it's not as big of like the rivers and the drainage, but I work with the stormwater program. And one of the things we focus on is litter. And a lot of times people do things in their communities and do things around the city and don't realize that how drains get clogged up and cause flooding. So I think if people are more aware of things that they are doing and things that they can stop doing, it'll help with flooding in the future. Prevent flooding in the future, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's interesting because if you think about like during a major flood event, it could totally just like knock down everyone's garbage cans, and then all that litter clogs the drains. It goes into the river systems. So one, it's not good for the water quality or the environment, but two, it's obviously not good for the drainage system, right? So that's a good point, Dory. How about Melissa? Do you have anything you want to add to that topic? Thinking about what would our communities, if we could really just become flood over the next several years?
I mean, I guess like the biggest thing would be like, you know, would the way that we develop certain areas change, or would we like, or would you instead want to like improve areas that have already been, you know, like developed outside of like, you know, floodplain areas, just so that you're preventing more encroachment onto like, you know, like the natural floodplain?
Yes, that's a great point. How do we manage floodplains more efficiently to allow there to be room for the water to go, right? That's a big challenge. That's, you know, how do we balance the pressures of development with the pressures of having there be enough space for water? And I like to think of it, you know, if we use our imaginations, like how can we creatively design places for the water to go if there was a flood? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Like what could our communities do to create spaces for the flood water to go or enhance our existing floodplains? RJ, you want to add?
Well, I know it's been reflected on by others, but we could make use of the existing contours in the terrain and use the existing natural reservoirs, if you will, as collectors for this inefficient way. That's part of the thing some of us are working on. And I think that would certainly be one direction we can take. The other, I suppose, is to be more careful with our building specifications. We have seen in time that the requirements for building continues to go up. And 10 years ago, someone built a house according to specifications that's now below the acceptable level in terms of building codes. I think we ought to look more carefully at this. There's great investment, and families are at risk because of our, if you will, failure to see far enough into the future to plan properly. So just doing more of the business that we know could be done more carefully would be of help. But I think the biggest parameter of that is taking a long-term look instead of a short-term focus on our programs, and try to think big and step large.
Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting. Like adapting building codes or examining. I mean, I think, RJ, that's getting to what you were talking about earlier, is like defining what our problems are.
Yes.
Right? And like
exactly.
What problems might be, one of the problems might be, or it is, one of the problems is that building codes are not, our building codes are outdated, or some of them are not allowing, they're not good enough to meet the challenges of our flood risk.
Right.
If we're going to sustain life in this land, it's very important for the buildings to be able to withstand these disasters.
Right. This is very critical, not just to families, but for the existence of the building industry. I think they lose credibility if you see them operating on, I can't think of a better word, on shabby specifications, if you will, or inadequate specifications.
So, yeah, I mean, that's very visionary to think about. Like, what does our building stock look like if we actually adapt our codes, like to be, and you know, it doesn't have to be that they're elevated, 20 feet off, whatever, however many feet off the ground.
Right.
Like, what do we, I wonder if there's, like, that's a cool vision to think about. Like, what would be a really innovative design for Louisiana, that could withstand intense flood risk over the next 100 years, even. Like, that's a very interesting concept.
I would even add this: when, if I remember correctly, over a decade ago, there was a subdivision built out of Mandeville that was in a very swampy area adjacent to Lake Pontchartrain. The point is that they made provision for this. They built on pilings, and they had roadways for access, but they had a very scenic environment that they lived in, and they loved it that way. But they didn't have a flood problem. But it was the way they constructed their development that made all the difference in the world. So that's part of what you and I are talking about. Construct around what the water demands are going to be, and assure that we are careful enough to account for it as best we can.
It's not just the individual building, it's also the neighborhood as a whole. How can you design sites, whether it's a whole neighborhood, whether it's a watershed region? How can you design these, large parcels of water, large parcels of land, to allow for space for the water to flood?
Right.
And I think the contours concept is brilliant. I mean, and if you think about it, like these could be really innovative recreational places. Like we could design places to flood, and then there could be opportunities for humans to recreate, to boat, to enjoy the nature, whatever. I think the opportunities are pretty, there's so many opportunities.
Yep.
Justin, if you had anything you wanted to add, feel free to incorporate it in the chat. I know you know that. How about, let's talk about this last question. Why is talking about water in Louisiana important? which we already talked, we're talking about it. What is unique about Region 7 in this context? So, like when we're thinking about the whole watershed region, Region 7, like what are there specific characteristics for this region that we should you know, that we should all talk about versus other parts of the state? Does anyone else want to chime in? Maybe Dory or Melissa?
I mean, I guess one of the like unique things I see, at least, I mean, this may be more like EBR, like the parish versus, you know, Region 7, but it's just like, you know, I mean, or it's the entire state really, but we're surrounded by water, like, and I think because of that, like people only look at the like recreational benefits of that, but we're not thinking about the like dangers that can pose because they don't happen every year, they don't happen every week, you know. So when something big comes along, you know, that's the only time we're forced to recognize it.
Right. And that's right. That's coming up. That's coming up. It's like it's not until we know. I mean, we think we understand that we're surrounded by. Well, we know that we're surrounded by water, but it's not until a disaster we realize, oh shit, we really are surrounded by water, so it's like, so this, I think the general trend that we're talking about is that we have to learn how to live harmoniously with the abundance of water that surrounds us, right?
Right.
And I think the Louisiana Watershed Initiative as a whole is really trying to address this by thinking about floodplain management, but not from a parish by parish standpoint, but from a watershed standpoint. So do any of you, I guess I want to go back to one of these questions, and it's one of them is who collectively should be involved in solving this problem? So it's like, are there any specific groups or stakeholders that you think should also be a part of this conversation? Dory?
I'm listening now, but I'm driving too. That's why I'm not talking as much. But as far as
No
who should be
worries.
involved, pretty much everyone should be involved because everyone together will solve the problems, and it's the solution to the problem. Can't one group of people just do everything, but everyone collectively, I think, what could help solve the problem.
So how do we get, like, how can the community, I agree with you, but how do we feasibly allow for the community, just any community member, to participate in this process and to add value to this process? Like, how do we get them engaged?
As far as having them, you could just get their opinions. It's not, I don't feel like they have to actually be a part of the process, but actually getting other people's opinions, seeing things from other people's point of views or other people's ideas.
Yes. So I like that, Dory, and I think that kind of goes to say, you know, if we're going to be building projects that could impact communities, it would be nice to have diverse perspectives on what those projects could look like who are they going to benefit, like as RJ was saying, like how could we use existing landscape features and contours within the land as to store rainwater? Because I feel like in my brain, I'm imagining like our communities need to be redesigned in order to have multiple places for water to go. In the case of a 2016, I mean, and that, obviously that's a lot of water, right? So how do we, is it even possible to prepare for that amount of water? But like, why not? And I think that's the vision here is, let's think big. Could we create massive watershed scale projects that take into consideration diverse opinions of what they actually look like. Do you think we could do this, RJ?
Yes, I think not only think we could, but I think we should. I think I don't want to sound arrogant about this because I don't have as many answers as I wish I did, but I think we engage certain problems and we attack it from the point of view of how much budget money do we have and what will the people stand in the way of taxes if we're talking about a state issue, and we build maybe what we can afford, knowing that it's probably in a few years going to be dated. And I think, for example, if we looked at things like the cost of 2016, you're talking about probably $15 billion and probably the loss of 38 lives. And I think if you look at that, you can build a whole hell of a lot of dams, if you pardon my bluntness here. And I think we ought to take a broader scope and look at the long range. That is what I'm advocating for the AMEC. I think there have been plans laid that are done by great engineers, but I offer one that I think is superior, and I think because it does a more complete job of that. Again, I regret being personal, but I think that's the idea. We need to step larger, and if it costs more, look at what the long term is. If you're talking hurricanes, Katrina was $280 billion. You're talking about huge monies in losses as well as people. And I think we ought to examine our plans in that light. And that, I begin to preach a little bit. I apologize, so I'll back off of it.
No need to apologize. We're about to go back to the main session. So we'll come back to this.
Okay.
Yes, we have 1 minute. Okay, that's nice that they give us a buffer. So you're thinking about the money, that's, it's going to cost a lot of money to do these things. How long should we be planning for in the future?
Well, I don't have all the answers. This is going to be a large effort by a body of good men and women put together to address just that. I don't think we should be so focused on the time required as what is necessary to live with the water. That's what you said earlier. And we need to approach it from that side. It may be that we continuously building. I think the time is not so much the function as how much we protect our people. As our populations grow, our needs are going to grow. So
right.
That I suggest we change the problem definition. That's partly what I was talking about earlier.
I see smiling faces, so that's good news to me at least. I did get to pop in and out. It looked like round 2 of the breakout groups went much smoother than round 1, so that's really good news. Just a couple minutes, not a couple minutes, but a little bit of time for people to get back to this group here. Okay, I think we've got just about every single person back in the main room. So thank y'all. I got to pop in and out of some of the conversations and they were really great. It's really a privilege to be able to just be in the space with y'all. So thank you again. We're gonna switch up the order for folks, and Kim, thank you for taking over responsibilities for facilitating there so I could handle some logistical items. Well, maybe we'll go backwards from the last group that we did last time. So Kim, if you want to go ahead and give us your report out, that would be awesome.
Sure, and I'll be brief, but we had a really great conversation. I think, some of the issues that we talked about that we're trying to solve really are around how do we manage the ability to coexist with the water we're living around and reducing flood risk and repetitive flooding issues. Being creative and rethinking some of our solutions. That's a problem. We're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And, you know, we really want to limit development in high risk areas, which is going to really need us to kind of rethink how we're doing business in terms of our development process. And, you know, I think we talked really about what it would look like if we solved some of those problems, and that everybody would have the ability to live in a safe and affordable home, and that we would have natural channels in floodplains and reduce flood risk and improve flood response, and really have better community resilience. And because we would have a minimal risk of flooding, a better quality of life. And we did also talk about who should be involved in solving the problem. And obviously we talked about government up and down the spectrum and universities, and as well as, you know, housing, social science folks, economic folks. So really we thought everybody down to your average citizen should be involved in this conversation, which I thought was a really great, great way to frame it. And then we also talked about why it's important and what's unique. You know, we have very unique regions and ecoregions and species in Region 7, and that the flooding is not constrained to the floodplain. And so that's something we need to really think about in this region, and that, you know, we've always lived with water in Louisiana, and we need to figure out how to live with water in Region 7. So thank you guys for that great conversation.
Oh, I love that. We've always lived with water, and we need to figure out how to live with it in Region 7. Powerful stuff, y'all. We'll go to Drew.
Thanks, Rachel. So we had a really, really great conversation, and we took a few minutes at the end to try to take a first stab at a vision statement, which I think everybody here knows is a rather difficult task, but we're able to distill it down into the beginning of one, and what we got to was sustainable coordination. So not only enabling this coordination across the region, but setting it up and making sure it is maintained and sustained. And one of the other things that I want to call out that keeps sort of popping up in my group is sort of a deep-seated connection to the past in our region and our history. And there's we're bringing up a lot of solutions from our history and from our past, while at the same time talking about these forward-thinking solutions. So there's this interesting dichotomy that's going on of the things that we can learn from how we used to do things, and while moving forward and changing things and coordinating and making a more sustainably coordinated region.
Yeah, also some more powerful stuff that kind of makes me think about how, you know, it's like my grandmother's noodles recipe. Nobody can make it like her, right? Like it's that history. But I wouldn't have ever trusted my grandmother to make some fried chicken, right? Like these are the new ways of thinking that we incorporate from a food perspective. Thank you. Let's go to Risa.
Sure. Our group was really talking about the lack of forward-thinking approaches that seems to exist today, that really need to address both the human and environmental aspects working together, both downstream and upstream. I like that play on words, by the way, Anwar. And not focusing on just one politician's requests in any particular issue, thinking bigger with a holistic approach. Flood risk has to be addressed, but making sure those interconnected systems are really viewed from that regional lens. And so what would it look like? Really a balance between green space and residential and developed areas, and a real sense of community and cooperation and working for the future. And I love Tina's phrase of humans would live with water and not try to control it. Really going back to those nature-based solutions. And who should be working on this? Everyone, but everyone working together, not in silos, in a connected manner at a regional level, so that you're not losing the insights from the local levels, but you are allowing a greater good mentality to be implemented. That's the short version. But the overall, jewels in this area are very special in this region, and we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure they're here for our legacy.
Ah, I love it. I love it. All hands on deck, y'all. Let's move to Evelyn.
Hey, thank you. Again, great conversation from the group. Thank you all. When we were talking about what is the problem we're trying to solve, we were kind of circling around three themes that I could hear from the group. One being, management and coordination. You know, we need to like work together across the jurisdictional boundaries and in different watersheds, right? That's why we're all here. The other main thing is though, we have this flood hazard itself that is just a really high magnitude hazard, you know? And so we have to try to figure out how to limit our exposure to it, right? Like the hazard keeps changing. It sometimes gets worse, you know? And then we have to think about how we use the land, right? Because that's a major factor in all of this. We talked about water quality and drought also being another big piece of the problem here. And we talked about kind of a need for better communication and education that helps the consumers in this system. And what I heard that we meant by that is like people who buy homes and build homes and live in homes that are subject to flood risk. Those are the consumers, right? And so you have to like try to infiltrate that group with a message so that people know what's a good choice and what might be dangerous to them, you know, in the long term. And we talked about maybe some good examples in other places where the water is part of the culture, but it's not, you know, a scary thing like Reese is saying. It's not something to control necessarily, but it's something that you plan, you know, with the water in mind. We talked about some incentives again in this consumer system of building homes that may lead people to use a lot of fill, right, and map themselves out of the flood zone. And that's definitely a dynamic that we're dealing with. And how do we try to have policies in place that preserve green space? And one factor in this solution that we heard was the state legislature potentially could play a role in that, but that also having NFIP flood insurance is a critical way to mitigate these problems. And the more people who buy it, the cheaper it should be potentially, because you have a larger pool of consumers, you know, keeping it afloat. So thanks again, y'all. Great discussion.
Wow, yeah, thank y'all. Y'all went concrete. We got into the legislature with some stuff, huh? So it sounds like. What about Brad's group?
Yeah, so I think echoing everyone, we talked a lot about design and like just trying to envision like what do our communities look like if they were designed to be flood proofed. And one thing that came up that it's kind of interesting from a community design standpoint, like how do we deal with garbage? Because one of the issues that's arising is garbage being stuck in the drainage system that's preventing water from actually draining and flowing. And then obviously that garbage ends up in our rivers and it affects water quality and pollutes our everything that we love water for. It destroys that. So that was one interesting thing, like how do we redesign our approach to the garbage situation? But then getting even so beyond that, like how do we redesign our homes? And like how do we redesign building codes to be more adaptable to the risks that we're faced with in the next many years? And also neighborhood design, and how can we build spaces for water to flood? And then I think what was really interesting was following the natural contours of the land. Like how can we just study the land and where the water would flow naturally and just optimize that for not only flood storage capacity, but also for human recreation and connectivity, just for quality of life. So it was a really great discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering how creative we can get in the ways that we think about redesigning things like neighborhoods. I think that's a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you, Brad. Let's go to Tom. Oh, you're muted, Tom.
You guys missed the best part. We have a great geographical representation in our group. We have Washington, St. Tammany, and St. John's. And so you get three parishes one with a lot of development maybe from New Orleans and industrial development, St. Tammany with a lot of more residential development recently, and Washington Parish to the parish of the more rural character. And I think we saw that to some extent reflected where the more urban parishes had a real concern about large subdivision development and sort of the vision that we could avoid some of that development, especially that development that later requires infrastructural protections. They mentioned some projects, sort of the idea that we're having to spend billions to protect things that should have never been built. So in the future, can we not have those regrets with growth going forward? I heard the word smart growth used by some of our participants. In terms of what it would look like if we solved the problem, we also saw an emphasis on protecting green space. We heard a link again to the water quality issue. An interesting perspective connecting to the trash, also from a manager's perspective, that a lot of people link flooding to trash and maintenance, but we have major development challenges with our low elevation gradients, and educating the public about that is difficult. So getting people on board and educated with these ideas is crucial. We also had a mention of some buyout issues, so that people whose homes need to be elevated could be elevated, and people who really live in difficult places, what can be done to make sure they're not in harm's way, but they're not being made to move in a way that harms their quality of life. And then finally, who should be involved? I'll quote Ms. Ivy from our group, who said, all these policies should be people-centric and not just moving earth.
I love it, Miss Ivy. Thank y'all. All right, we're going to go into our last breakout group for the day and discuss goals, and then we'll come back and close out. So hang in there. I'm going to open all of these rooms, and we'll have about 21-ish minutes. Please note that a couple of people might have fallen off, so your group might be a little smaller. So I apologize in advance for that.
And we're back. This is kind of fun, isn't it? Going back and forth. You guys like this process? Hold on, I'm gonna pull up the presentation. All right. Is everybody awake? It's almost dinner time. So we're going to talk about goals now. Okay? So here we go. I'm going to do what I did last time and read the questions out loud, and we can start organically, and then we will dive into the questions as we see fit. So here we go. What is the single most important outcome you would like to see for Region 7 of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative? What are critical steps to make sure that we achieve the LWI mission statement? What are critical steps to make sure that we achieve the components of the vision that we were just discussing? Who collectively needs to be involved in advancing these goals? And just so everyone's aware, our mission statement is reduce flood risk, improve floodplain management throughout the state, and maximize the natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain. So that's a lot. And I'm wondering, after everything we've talked about today, RJ, do you want to start off with what do you think are some goals that we could set today to achieve what we have been discussing?
Some of this is a little bit of an overlap of perhaps what I've said, but I think, let's say, try to go for complete solutions like the Amite River watershed. I think try to go for a more complete water staged solution than what is being proposed for that. I think take another iteration in that capacity. I think critical is that we need to address the entire problems. You know, you and I touched upon this. And I think what I just referred to is one result of that. Look for total solutions and not just part. We need to take long range looks at all of this because it's the nature of our state and our entire existence. Be sure that we have adequate resources defined and what we need to make for continuity in our political process. Because if we're talking long term, we can't be, if you will, totally destroyed by a new political party that steps in, this kind of thing. I'll quit there and let someone else talk. Those are some ideas that I have.
Thank you, RJ. How about Dory? I know you're in the car, but if you want to answer, what do you think, how can we achieve our mission of reducing flood risk and improving floodplain management? Do you have any ideas? I mean, I think you did bring up the garbage issue. That's a pretty tangible way to fix drainage issues. Anything else you could think of to achieve our mission?
That's really all. Like I said, I'm new to this, and as far as like drainage structures and stuff, I don't work with all this, so I'm learning things. So just pretty much piggybacking off of what someone else said about subdivisions, and when as far as subdivisions, I know all around me, when I look around, you go down the street and there's a subdivision here, there's a subdivision there, and it's usually places where water used to be able to settle and go, but now it's subdivisions coming up everywhere, and the water really has nowhere to go. So I think being watching where you put subdivisions and that on that line.
Yeah, Dory, that is some local knowledge right there, and that is that's fascinating. Like if you're observing that, then hopefully many people are observing that increased development is also, it could be indicative of increased flooding somewhere else, and it could be a different parish even too. So that could be a goal. That's a great goal, is like we need to be very strategic about where we build so as we don't impact people or communities up or downstream. Melissa, do you want to add anything to that thinking? Like what do we need to do about how do we meet the demands of development in the future if populations are increasing? What should communities do to mitigate this?
I mean, I guess it's like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I ask these questions, and these are hard questions, right? These are.
Yeah.
But we're just brainstorming together and having it, it's just for fun, but hopefully we can get somewhere with it and actually use whatever we think about to create solutions for real, because it is serious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it ties kind of back to what we were, talking about earlier regarding like, you want to update current ordinances, and maybe even like, if you have communities that like could stand to use improvement rather than trying to develop like on open lands, or finding, like land that's already open and trying to find like a kind of recreational, like natural use for that instead of, immediately going the development route.
So echoing what you're saying, instead of developing more subdivisions in open land, can we develop new subdivisions on places that have already been developed, like infill development?
Right.
But that's challenging, because what if there isn't any infill development, and the choice, we don't have a choice except to build in the floodplain. Like, how do we balance that pressure? That's for anyone to answer. How do we balance the pressure that developers and even political representatives will try to put on us as a group for financial means, right?
Well, might I suggest that we involve the developers and make financial objectives available to them by their contributing to the development of the program to facilitate what we want, and also even contributing some of the dollars, because they still will make their profits. Cooperative effort is the only way to do it, I would think.
I love that. Thank you. But it seems like that there has to be some component of the state as the state exercising some sort of power from a hazard mitigation standpoint, from a standpoint of protecting the health, the property, the welfare of all citizens of Louisiana. There has to be some level of policy to help as many people as possible. That might have to happen beyond local jurisdictions. Do you all agree to that? Like, do you think that that's true? Or maybe that's what your governing authority as Region 7, if that could be something that you all do as a governance structure.
I would think possibly if you find that government entities could evaluate properties, let's say, that are otherwise largely condemned, and be able to acquire these for very low cost, then you have the challenge of being able to form a manner of building houses that wouldn't be excessively expensive, i.e. on pilings, if you will. And that combination could give you a use of land that's otherwise not available and make affordable housing for many who could not otherwise have it. So
you're saying the government buy certain swaths of land for affordable housing needs?
Well, yes, and if that coupled with developments would fit the dollars. I look upon what we do in terms of paying a lot of unfortunate people housing dollars to allow them to live. I'm not so sure that you couldn't use some of that money to develop it this way, and possibly even allow these good people to be able to afford a home that they could buy instead of having to continue to pay rent. Things of this sort, maybe.
Yeah.
It's worth looking at, I think, yeah.
How about also the government having the ability to, or the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, having the ability to buy out communities that have frequent flooding, and then that land, they would get paid a more than fair market share for their space and be able to move to a safer property. But then that land then could be turned into places to flood, floodable land.
Yes, build another way in order that you can use it for that development. Sure, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And I think so. Buyouts. Do you think that buyouts in Region 7 would be a good idea? RJ, you said yes.
Well, I say it depends upon the nature of the dollars. That's all.
Right.
I'm speaking really with very little backup here, but yes, I would say anywhere that the economics work. Yes.
What about Dory? Have you heard of buyouts? And do you think that do you have an opinion about buyouts, and do you think it could be a good goal to help protect people from flooding?
Yes, I do think there will be. As far as flooding, with me, I work for the Department of Transportation, and they do buyouts all the time when they get ready to do a highway or something. They buy people out for their safety and for other reasons also, so it could benefit flooding the same way.
Thank you. Let's look at our questions and see. I think you're right, RJ. They're kind of repeating, but I mean, are there any other? Let's see. I kind of like this one. What is the single most important outcome you'd like to see for Region 7 of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative? Like, what is something? That's pretty good. Like, what would you want to happen with this group? Melissa, would you like to share your thought about that?
Sure. I think sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I mean, I think the biggest thing is you obviously want to see that all communities are the risks of everybody is taken into account, and from that you want to see everybody benefiting across the board instead of maybe one particular area experiencing I don't know, a greater benefit.
Yeah, I think equity, equity in flood risk reduction. So it's not just one area benefiting from these investments or from these priorities, but the whole state or the whole watershed region their risk is getting reduced because of this program. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yes.
So we're almost out of time. Maybe we have 6 minutes. Is there anything, as far as we've had a great conversation, I want to is there anything else that any of you would like to be captured here today that's going to influence what happens in Region 7? It could be about anything that we've discussed. RJ, anything?
Well, I have a very selfish one, and I'd like to see a system that I'm proposing applied to the Amite River. I think it would have a great benefit in protecting the people of Watson and Denham Springs. But in terms of the question,
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead.
I'm wondering, can you just tell everyone, so we have a little bit of your knowledge, what is it exactly that you're proposing for the Amite River?
Well,
I know that could be a long conversation.
No, let me see. Can I get do I have the ability to share the screen and show a figure? That's probably a bit much. Let me just try to say it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have the power to give you the host.
It's about 30 miles of river, and it has flooded people as long as the river has been there. Good men have looked at this, and we've made plans to try to siphon off that water, and really it hasn't worked so well. Right now there is a plan to put an installation at Darlington, which is a town, about 30 miles above Watson, and stop some of that water from coming down and flooding. What I'm proposing is that we extend that down the river and put 3 phases of what I call weirs or dams, and do a more complete job of controlling the flood. And one of the benefits is that the flood water is stored in the cavities that were created over 100 years of drilling sand and gravel in that area. It's a natural void.
Okay.
And that would be the thing that would help stop that flood program and set an example. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to it, but I think it would help us a lot in that area.
And Darlington, so you're saying the Darlington Reservoir, I've heard of that. And
Right.
three other weirs, three other flood control structures down
Well,
from Darlington?
this would, yeah, take Darlington in a reduced size would be one phase, and downstream would be two more phases. So I have a three-phase system instead of a one Darlington phase.
Okay. Interesting.
I'd be happy to talk elsewhere. This is not the place, but
Right. So do you think, are there any other projects in Region 7 that you think are, like, do you think projects like that should be implemented in other parts of the region too?
I'm convinced the technology is sound and would work. I think we could look at its applicability to all the other rivers we're talking about, you know, Tangipahoa and things like this. But the only other thing I would suggest, and I hate to be dominant, but here's something. I think we look at rainwater, and that's what we're thinking about when we think about the AME. Hurricane water backs in. And Harvey in Houston is one where they had 40 to 60 inches of backup water, flooded that whole region.
Right.
Our good coast would actually be ripe for that kind of catastrophic thing. And I think we need to look at what can we do to control those storms. That would be a Gulf Coast program involving many states, and I would like very much to have Louisiana be the key leader of that. And I'm going to stop because I know I've stepped beyond my bounds here, but I do believe that these two things would help control our water world, if you will, which is what we live in. And I think we must do it if we're going to continue to live here.
Yes. No, I prompted you, so you're fine. I thought it'd be good for all of us to just learn a little bit more. So, but about this, so you know, you're saying a multi-state effort to plan for hurricane risk.
Well, that multi-stage would work for rainfall or hurricanes if they come in there. And all it amounts to is it looks at the elevation of about 150 feet, and it has little 3 steps of this dam series. And it allows the water to collect and be controlled flow down. It lets it come out slowly instead of dumping it all on places like Watson and Denham Springs, which is precisely what happened in 2016.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's interesting.
I'd be happy to talk to you later. And I do apologize for this group, but
no, I think we're fine. We all seem to be, we're winding, my energy is winding down, to be honest.
yeah, I do think as a state, we need to have broader views. I think we have to look at changing the paradigm of how we look at storms. I think we've had a limited view, and I think we need to expand those horizons and change the way we define our things, much of which we've talked about here today. We just need to step larger and plan to stay in the rodeo a lot longer than just little fixes here and there.
Yeah. Dory, do you have any final thought that you'd like to share with us going forward?
Welcome back. I feel like there were some groups who got cut off. I'm so sorry, y'all. Okay, well, let's go ahead and, oh, that's okay, Matthew. I see that your phone ran out of battery. Apologies, that's a difficult technological challenge to manage, especially when we're on our phones now more than ever during COVID-19. So thank you for joining us, though, Matthew. We'll go ahead and start from the top again. So Tom, if you want to do the report out for your group, and we can start there. Oh, I think you're muted again. It automatically mutes you when you come into this room. I apologize.
Now, you know, sadly, our 57 seconds were not 57 seconds. And I think Mr. Wheat from Washington Parish was saying something very interesting. But let me try to summarize what I think his last point was, and some of that. And I guess in terms of outcomes, I think there was interest in better understanding funding sources to create mechanisms where also along with that, where if there is development, that that the true costs of that are internalized by the private parties, and in education, right? In building more education about these issues throughout the region. Also, Mr. Weed had some interesting perspective on the utility of the H&H models, that he really hoped that they are a strong outcome of this process, because as he was saying that everybody is going to fight for their own parish, and to some extent their own interests, but if we can better understand, let's say how Washington Parish, where he is, connects with St. Tammany Parish, and how they're connected on some of those issues, they could better see the incentive to potentially collaborate, or to modify their practices to potentially reduce impacts. So this idea of a outcome where there's greater education around this issue, where there are, I think, more general access to scientific knowledge and more public scientific knowledge around this, and that can really serve as a forum for people to start making changes and progress related to the goals of the Watershed Initiative.
Wow, thanks, Tom. And I think some of those pieces actually relate back to the values too, which means that we're coming full circle in ways that are really meaningful. Thank y'all. Let's go to Brad next, and then we'll go to Evelyn after Brad.
Thanks. Thank you. So yeah, we were just, it was good. I think it's kind of just reiterating some of the stuff that we've already talked about. But some of the bigger things that came out were like really, whether it's the watershed region or the state, thinking about policies and higher standards that could help with subdivision design and help with open space preservation and help with if neighborhoods are getting bought out, like what happens to that? Like, can there be a stipulation where that land area could be used for storage capacity? And really thinking about holistic and comprehensive solutions that, to many problems, like how could our solutions really address, different types of flood risk, hurricane, extreme precipitation, riverine flooding. So almost like reassessing hazard mitigation planning, but like, making sure that we cover all the bases, which they should do anyway, but you know what I mean. And really thinking about projects that very strategic placement of projects within the watershed, so they are not impacting downstream or upstream, but also so they're actually reducing flood risk. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, like we all want it to be there. We want there to be an equitable, equity in flood risk reduction. I think that was a big piece. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. We'll go to Evelyn, and just wanted to do a time check. We do have about 6 minutes, so for our remaining groups, try to make it quick if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks. So we had, again, more great input. Thanks, y'all. Again, like the other groups are saying, focusing on making sure that the public understands what things like watershed models are telling us. H&H models, that's like complex data and complex outputs. And so you got to explain that to people like myself who are non-engineers. We also need to really think about who are the stakeholders in this process. And so we're going to talk about having some policy changes that would impact how we develop. There are some stakeholders that need to be very involved in a process like that, not just on the public education front, which would be like our academic institutions, but also people who deal with the outfall of flood events. So like emergency managers, and then all the way to your different legislators, right? Your parish and city legislators, but also your state legislators and the folks that they talk to need to really understand the problem if there is to be a policy solution. And so we also talked about one thing I thought was very interesting. Individual level actions are an important way to talk about this problem. And so specifically we talked about like the historic methods of building, because water's always been a problem, right? We've dealt with it in the past by building homes that were, you know, up on piers and whatnot. And so it's an important point to just recall from people's memory that we do have solutions. We just have to use them sometimes. So thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all. I love that individual action. Let me see. Let's go to Risa next, and then we'll go to Drew after.
Okay, well, I'll keep it short. Our group really felt like our outcome for all of this effort should be that nobody's home will ever get water in it again. And in the process to get there, making sure everyone's voice is heard, whether they're upstream or downstream, in a nice neighborhood or not nice neighborhood, whatever the case. And making a plan based on data and making sure that plan has adaptive management enrolled in it so that it's going to be adjusted over time to be forward facing was critical. And all of that is tied to what the community as a whole understands, and then they will have to buy into the process. And we have to take as much of the politics out of it as possible. And we talked about personal testimonies shared and hope and positivity being the human element rather than focusing on jurisdictional elements. And our group also noted that they felt some goals were missing from the LWI structure, that they should also add nature-based solutions, preserving our green space, and the focus of water not being our enemy, because water is our friend.
I love it. I love it, y'all. Thank you, Risa, and thank you to the participants of that group. Drew, and then we'll go to Kim.
Thanks, Rachel. So I want to thank my group. We had really great participation throughout, and some really awesome ideas came out of it. We were able to kind of distill our discussions into 3 goals. The first being increased political, social, and economic coordination in water management through some sort of body or mechanism. 2, improve public understanding of our relationship with water, and then as a sort of a function of that, increased public will to address the issues surrounding water management. And then 3, it's kind of broad, but sort of a strengthened connection between water quality and stormwater management, and improvements in both of those areas together.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew. This sounds like a really robust conversation. Kim?
Sure, I'm just going to add a couple things because many of the things that the other groups had touched on, we also touched on. I think our group talked a lot about the need to educate, and that was just such an important piece of whatever outcomes we develop for goals for the region. And particularly educating about past mistakes, coming up with better solutions, raising awareness of risk, and thinking about how water quality and ecology are interrelated with flood risk reduction. I think those were key issues that came out of it. And I think some specific things that we talked about, which were really interesting, were kind of thinking about how can we, from that education, create a demand for better demonstration projects that'll show how we can do things better. And also thinking about how can we retrofit some of the urbanized areas in our region for multi-use facilities that can act as, storage areas and also educational awareness areas.
Ooh, thank y'all. It sounds we're talking projects, we're talking programs, we're talking policies. We are talking, what does it look like for this work to be done holistically? So I'm going to put up this closing slide. I put my contact information in the chat box if any of you want to reach out to me personally. So first and foremost, thank you for being here. This was 2 hours of your life, and I hope you feel that these 2 hours were productive. what we're going to do is I'm going to follow up to everybody who registered with an email. It's going to have a takeaway document from what we heard here today. And I'm going to be able to send those documents out for comments. And then we'll also be sharing this with the Regional Steering Committee to hear from them as well. If you want more information about the watershed initiatives, you can go to this link right here. If you want more information specific to Region 7, then you can click on this link that is right here that's highlighted. And then we do have some upcoming meetings for the Regional Steering Committee. So August 26th from 1 to 3:30. September 23rd from 9 to 11:30, and October 28th from 9 to 11:30. And I know that we are closing out very quickly here, so don't worry. I'm going to be sending out the slides as well as some follow-up information to everybody on this call. So thank you once again for being here. Please know that your time is appreciated. And really, I can't thank y'all enough for showing up, not just today as a person, but really for Louisianans in Region 7 and across the state. So thank y'all. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your dinner. I'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and Rita.